Clark, congratulations on Ralph Breaks the Internet. I enjoyed it immensely, as I did with the first Wreck-It Ralph.
Thank you so much.
Thinking back to when the first movie came out, what was your reaction when you heard you were going to get to go back to this world and these characters again?
I was so excited. I had actually moved on to a different project, and Rich and Phil were starting to debate the next film they wanted to make, and they came and said, we're thinking about making a sequel. And in the 95-year history of Disney animation, this is only the third sequel, so it's very rare for us to do it. But what excited me was you make these films over the course of 4 or 5 years, you create these characters, you build these worlds, and you fall in love with them, and then one day the movie goes out, and then you move on to something else. And though that can be exciting, it's also kind of, sad to think that you're not going to get a chance to revisit it. So when they pitched the idea of going to the internet, I was like, that's such a great idea, and I love these characters. Let's go off and do it.
So you're a producer on both of the films. What is it like being a producer in animation, and are there kind of differences between that and, say, producing a live action film?
Yeah, in live action, oftentimes you're the person who's sort of trying to figure out where's the idea and how do we bring the actors together and who are the directors going to be and raising the money. When you're in animation, especially with Disney animation, some pieces of those puzzle are already there in place. The directors exist, Rich and Phil exist, you have this company that's going to fund it, so you're not trying to raise that money. But the other aspect of it, which is really kind of marshaling a team of people together, figuring out how do you create a creative space where the directors can actually build their story while you're also dealing with the fact that you have a budget and a deadline. That's kind of very similar between both live action and animation producers. We have 500 people on the film at our peak production, so it's a lot of people to be managing from that standpoint. There's a lot of moments where you're sort of jumping off a cliff, hoping somehow you're going to figure out the answer as you're falling, but that's the part that excites me every single time I go off and embark on a new animated film.
And what would kind of a typical day in your job look like, or is there a typical day?
Every day is slightly different, but I think the commonality is the directors fundamentally are working with all of the different departments, from story to layout to animation to lighting, trying to give them the direction of the way they envision this movie going. And so your job as a producer is just to make sure all of that communication is happening correctly and that we're making the right amount of progress and that everybody feels good about the way we're collaborating as a group. That's really your job. You're kind of observing in some ways, and your goal is to just make sure that the team is operating at in the best way possible.
And you've been at Disney Studios for actually over 20 years, which is incredible. What have been some of the big changes that you've seen, even in more recent years, in relation to producing animation?
What's interesting is I've been with Disney Animation for 28 years. It's gone through several different leadership changes. And one of the most fascinating things happened was about 13 years ago, when we started to work with Pixar very closely, a new idea came in, which was, what if we actually had a story trust, which is a group of the other directors and writers who come in every 3 or 4 months and look at where we're at in terms of our story building. And it really broke down walls in a way and kind of opened the idea of the most collaborative environment I've ever been in my entire life. And it's amazing. We are building Ralph Breaks the Internet, and we have a screening, and then these other people come in and they look at it and they give us their natural reaction to it. And it doesn't mean that all of their answers or questions are right. It just means that they're poking at things that aren't currently working. And I think that is what has helped transform Disney Animation to be really, to my opinion, in terms of my 28 years, at the top of our game. I mean, if you look at films from Wreck-It Ralph to Frozen to Big Hero 6, Zootopia, Moana, Ralph Breaks the Internet, each of them has benefited from the fact that we are collaborating in a way I've never seen before, and is really exciting.
It's so fascinating to hear that there's such a kind of big process behind it, because you're right, the quality of Disney pictures has just maintained all this time.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is really the ability to step back and have objective point of view. If you're making the film every day, you're way too close to it. So how do you get those objective eyes that can be really powerful in terms of helping you hone the story to be the best it can be?
Brilliant. I think that you're the right person to ask this, because you have come from all of this experience and everything. But what kind of changes do you predict happening in animation and in Disney in kind of the next few years?
Well, the thing that I'm most excited about is I really think in animation in general, whether Disney or other studios, the story is becoming more complex. We're telling deeper stories with a deeper subject matter. I think Zootopia was a big leap for us to say we could go ahead and actually deal with the concept of bias in an animated film for families and for adults. And with this film, we really wanted to make sure we talked about that duality of the internet, the powerful part that connects the world in ways we've never been connected before, but there's a dark side to the internet too, which is the thing that kind of preys on people's insecurities, especially for kids in this world. And so to me, that's what excites me, and I hope that we continue to do that from a storytelling standpoint. Technology will always evolve, and we could never have made this film 6 years ago when we made the first film. Technology has allowed us to make this world be so big and so vast and so incredibly active, which is what the internet needs to be, that I think it's opening up doors to take us to worlds we never could have done previously. So those two things really excite me.
And speaking of the film, I was wondering, like having been there, you know, from start to finish, was there a particular character or maybe a scene that started like quite small in inception, and when you saw the final product, it totally exceeded all your expectations?
You know what's interesting is there's a scene with the Disney princesses, and when it was first pitched, and it was pitched in the very beginning, and it's rare that a scene is pitched in the beginning and actually ends up in the film. We all laughed at that idea and said there's a really great piece of comedy, but what I'm so excited about and saw over the evolution of the storytelling is how that scene became so organic to what the story needed to be. It started out just as a moment of comedy, and it built itself into becoming kind of the crux, a moment for Vanellope to start to think to herself, well, what is my destiny? Where am I supposed to be in this world? And the princesses are the perfect characters to talk to her about that. So for me, seeing that kind of evolve over time has been phenomenal, and then to watch the audiences react to it has been beyond anything I could have ever imagined.
Well, I love the Disney princess scene, even from the perspective of having grown up with those characters and all the voices coming back. It was absolutely amazing. My very final question for you, Clark, is what is next in the pipeline? What are you working on next?
So, you know, what happens is we get so involved in these films themselves that we really haven't even started to talk about what is that next journey going to be. What I have been so blessed to be able to do is work with a bunch of different filmmakers at Disney Animation and always kind of create these new and exciting worlds. So I'm excited to take a little bit of a rest and then embark on another project. And hopefully in a few years I'll be back here in Dublin with you and we can be talking about that next project.
Oh, I'd love that. Thank you so much. We'll leave it there then.
Great. Thank you, Deirdre.